On this Tuesday night, inside a refugee camp in the West Bank.
Welcome to camp. We search the freedom.
Ground zero of the Palestinian resistance and the fight against Israel. Dozens of daycares in Alberta begin rolling closures, the anger over $10 a day daycare. Long-delayed improvements for Canada's long-term care homes.
I don't feel good about what I see.
A wake-up call about what needs to be fixed now. And restoring the pyramids, project of the century or ridiculous renovation.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news. This afternoon, 4 NHL players were charged in connection with an alleged sexual assault in London, Ontario 5 years ago. That brings the total number of people now charged to 5. Mackenzie Gray is following this for us from Ottawa. Mackenzie.
Yeah, Donna, the identities of the former Canadian World Junior Hockey Team members said to be involved in an alleged group sexual assault of a 23-year-old back in 2018 are now public. Legal counsel for 4 NHLers, including star Philadelphia Flyers goalie Carter Hart, Mike McLeod and Cal Foote of the New Jersey Devils, and Calgary Flames forward Dillon Dubé have confirmed the former World Junior team members have been charged with sexual assault by London, Ontario police. Now, Carter Hart's lawyer tweeted out that he is innocent and will provide a full response to this false allegation in the proper form, a court of law. Foote's lawyer also maintained that his client is innocent of the charge and will fight to clear his name. A similar sentiment shared by separate statements for counsel for McLeod and Dubé as well, saying they deny any criminal wrongdoing, will defend themselves in court, and will be pleading not guilty. Now, their former World Junior teammate and former Ottawa Senator Alex Formenton surrendered to police in London, Ontario on Sunday. His lawyer confirmed he's been charged in relation with the alleged group sexual assault, but stated Alex will vigorously defend his innocence and ask people not to rush to judgment without hearing all the evidence. Now, the Globe and Mail previously reported 5 players from the 2018 World Junior team have been told to surrender to police in London to face sexual assault charges. All 5 of these players took leave of absences from their professional teams recently, with the Calgary Flames saying that Dubé left the club to deal with, quote, his mental health. Now, so far, Donna, London police have not commented on the potential charges, but they have said they're planning to address the case in a press conference on February 5th.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thank you. Now to tensions between America and Iran after a drone attack that killed 3 American soldiers at a military base in Jordan. Today, President Joe Biden said he has made a decision on how to respond and was asked if he blames Iran for the attack.
I do respond to all the sensitively supplying the weapons to the people who did it.
3 U.S. Army Reserve soldiers died. Dozens of others were injured in the overnight attack. Iran denies any involvement, but an Iran-backed militia group has claimed responsibility. President Biden would not elaborate on how he's decided to respond, but did repeat he does not want a wider war in the Middle East. Iran provides support to a number of armed groups in the Middle East, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, who violently oppose Israel's right to exist. And overnight in the occupied West Bank, undercover Israeli commandos infiltrated a Palestinian hospital and killed 3 Palestinian fighters. Security cameras show about 10 people disguised as medics and Muslim women carrying assault rifles. Witnesses say they entered the hospital at dawn and killed 3 Palestinian militants in their beds. One of the men was paralyzed. The IDF claims the men had been hiding in that hospital and using it as a base to plan terror attacks, claims Hamas has previously denied. That hospital is in Jenin, one of the most volatile cities in the occupied West Bank. Since October 7th, at least 370 Palestinians in the West Bank have been killed by Israeli forces. That's according to local health authorities, many of them in Jenin. The refugee camp there was set up more than 70 years ago for Palestinian refugees who were displaced during the 1948 Israel-Palestine conflict. It's now home to more than 10,000 people. Our crew was granted rare access to some Islamic Jihad fighters there, a group Israel says was responsible for an airstrike on a hospital in Gaza that killed about 500 people. Islamic Jihad is also holding some of the Israeli hostages who were kidnapped on October 7th. Daniele Hamamdjian went to Jenin to find out what drives the anger towards Israel.
At times, the Jenin refugee camp seems like it's been hit by an earthquake. for locals. Signs of destruction are more like scars in their fight against the Israeli occupation.
There's not a single building around here that doesn't have bullet holes or hasn't been hit by shrapnel. This neighborhood specifically is often targeted by the Israeli military. It's where most of the militants were born and where their families still live.
And those homes are destroyed as punishment for carrying out what Israel says are terror attacks.
Welcome to camp. We search the freedom.
Various armed Palestinian factions roam the streets.
المقاومة اللي بتخلينا نعيش بكرامة.
Mahmoud Abu Talal was once a fighter himself. Now he guides a new generation, teaching young men how to hit, run, and disappear when Israeli soldiers enter the camp.
الشرارة أول ما بتبدأ بجنين.
Jenin is ground zero for the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank. But Israel sees it as a hotbed of terrorists with a growing arsenal of weapons. As night falls, the fighters emerge, ready to clash with Israeli forces.
Jihad Islami.
Abdullah is with Islamic Jihad, which is backed by Iran, and whose fighters in Gaza took part in the October 7th attacks. It's also the dominant force in Jenin. His allegiance is based more on funding than ideology. He tells us Islamic Jihad is providing most of the money and weapons.
What is your goal?
احنا هدفنا انه نعيش حياة حرية بكرامة بدون إهانات بدون قتل بدون دم.
Abdullah is 25 and, like many here, a former prisoner. They know their M16 rifles are no match against Israeli drones and heavy armor, but they refuse to stand by when Israeli special forces raid their camp.
احنا بنحط سلاح تا يخرج الاحتلال من أرضنا ومقدساتنا يعني بنزت سلاح أما نشوف في حياة يعني حياة حلوة بكرامة بدون عنف بدون مشاكل وإحنا ساعتها بنزت سلاح.
This was the scene hours earlier. Since October 7th, Israeli incursions have been more frequent and more violent. This video was seen around the world. 2 boys, 8 and 15 years old, shot dead in broad daylight.
We want to live in this region 2 states, but there is no security and peace to Israeli people without any security and peace to Palestinian people. In Gaza, in Jenin, in Jerusalem, everywhere.
Those killed are revered as martyrs. Their images hang everywhere as tributes.
إحنا زي مجبورين كل ما يفوت نوصل لهم رسالة إنه إحنا هون موجودين ومن كل كلع من كل كلع مش بالكلمة بالرصاصة اللي بتطلع عليهم.
Daniele Hamamdjian, Global News, Jenin in the West Bank.
The UN Senior Humanitarian Coordinator for Gaza says there is no substitute for the humanitarian role the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, or UNRWA, plays in Gaza. The World Health Organization is also making an appeal, saying a suspension of funding will only hurt people in Gaza who desperately need support. Several key donors, including the US and Canada, have suspended funding to the UN aid agency after allegations several staff members in Gaza were involved in the October 7th attacks on Israel. Canada did announce today it will send humanitarian aid to Gaza through other channels. The Minister of International Development says $40 million will go to groups including the World Food Programme, the Red Cross, and UNICEF.
This is a commitment that we made that each and every innocent civilian who has humanitarian needs, we will step up for them, and we're stepping up in a big way.
The money will help provide food, water, and emergency medical aid in Gaza. An additional $5 million has been set aside for Canadian non-governmental organizations. UNRWA says it will have to cease its operations in Gaza by the end of February if funding is not restored. The federal government is being urged to indefinitely pause plans to expand eligibility for medically assisted dying, or MAiD. Canada was considering allowing MAiD for people whose sole medical condition is a mental illness, but it is a complex and controversial issue, and a parliamentary committee has concluded Canada's doctors and healthcare system are not ready for it. Eric Sorensen explains why and what lies ahead.
Since 2016, at this Toronto hospital and others, thousands of Canadians have ended their irremediable physical suffering through MAiD, medical assistance in dying, but not those with mental illness.
I think we were ready to do this.
Dr. Donna Stewart has been assessing psychiatric patients for decades and is disappointed that Ottawa has delayed expanding MAiD a second time. She says exceedingly few would meet the criteria for grievous, intolerable suffering, but they deserve to be treated equitably.
I think there's a lot of stigma against mental illness. It's easier to see somebody with a physical illness understand their suffering. But I think we have to accept that people with mental illness suffer just as much as people with physical illness.
CAMH, the Canadian Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, supports the delay.
We don't think the system is ready yet, even though there has been some work done over the past year.
Dr. Tariq Raji is sympathetic to expanding MAiD, but says it's difficult, for example, to define irremediable for mental illness.
We don't yet have clear guidelines for the clinicians and the physicians and the nurse practitioners who are willing to be involved in MAiD assessments to determine eligibility.
But when will those with mental illness be eligible for MAiD? The federal Conservatives and several provinces and territories want the measure delayed indefinitely.
I think there's a lot of issues with the government's approach to MAiD.
The federal health minister says he cannot expand MAiD without the provinces buying in.
Every single health minister from every single province, every single territory telling me they're not ready.
For the most seriously mentally ill patients, the delay prolongs their trauma.
I think that it discriminates against the mentally ill. I think it's going to leave a lot of mentally ill continuing to suffer.
The federal health minister says new legislation will lay out a revised timeline, but it looks increasingly possible the Liberal government will punt the controversial issue to beyond the next election. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
You might think the idea of making daycare more affordable would be embraced by everyone, but some parents in Alberta were left scrambling today because dozens of daycares began rolling closures. They're protesting the province's $10 a day childcare program.
Quality childcare at what cost?
Daycare providers gathered outside City Hall in Lethbridge, Alberta today. They're among several daycares frustrated with the rollout of the affordable program. In their view, it's created an underfunded and restrictive environment. Heather Yurix-West looks at whether the pushback in Alberta is a sign of things to come.
Calgary's Little Worlds Daycare was locked up tight Tuesday to the frustration of parents and their kids.
It's more about him and his needs not being met because the Alberta government, the federal government, and childcare providers cannot find a compromise.
Dozens of daycares in Calgary, Edmonton and Lethbridge took part in the one-day protest, organized by the Association of Alberta Childcare Entrepreneurs, an advocacy group of small business owners whose stated mission is to keep private childcare a choice for Alberta families.
Our intent was never to cause disruption or inconvenience, but really to raise awareness so that our families and our parents here know what's actually happening under this agreement and the future of childcare.
Alberta was one of the last provinces to sign on to Ottawa's $10 a day childcare plan back in 2021.
We fully expect that all provinces and territories will execute on their agreements, they'll follow through on the commitments, and I'm sure Alberta will be no exception to that.
Alberta has until 2026 to roll out the program, but the details of that rollout are causing operator concern. The protesting group is asking for more public funding and fewer restrictions.
I actually think that there's, some legitimacy in some of the concerns, and we've been hearing these across the country. The funding is too slow. The systems have not yet been developed, which they should have.
Alberta isn't the only province experiencing challenges. Reduced fees have seen an increase in demand, leaving childcare spaces in short supply.
That's why over the last year, we launched 2 space creation grants, one for the nonprofit side and another just this summer for for-profit operators.
Alberta's shuttered daycares are scheduled to open again Wednesday morning, though the group warns more protest closures could be coming. Canada may be on the road towards an affordable childcare system, but there are still bumps along the way. Heather Yurix-West, Global News, Calgary.
A major tragedy on a Mexican highway, that's coming up, plus a huge fire expected to burn for days in Texas. A judge in the state of Delaware has voided the $56 billion pay package of Tesla CEO Elon Musk, ruling the company's board of directors failed to prove the compensation plan was fair. The judge noted the pay package Tesla granted Musk in 2018 was the largest compensation plan in public corporate history, making him the richest person on the planet. Musk has not responded, but did tweet, "Never incorporate your company in the state of Delaware." Firefighters are battling a massive fire at a chicken farm near Houston. 2 of the huge chicken barns are engulfed. The fire is now contained but could burn for days. It's not clear how many chickens burned, but one commercial barn could hold up to 20,000 birds. Facing scrutiny over quality control, Boeing has withdrawn a request for a safety exemption needed to certify a new aircraft model. The company asked American regulators to allow it to begin delivering its 737 MAX 7 airliner, even though its de-icing technology did not meet safety standards. The issue affects other models of the 737 MAX that are already flying. Last year, regulators, including Transport Canada, ordered pilots flying the affected models to limit the use of the de-icing system. In Mexico, a collision between a truck and a passenger bus has killed at least 19 people. The crash happened on a coastal highway near Mazatlan. Both vehicles were burned down to their metal frames. The cause is under investigation. Still ahead, why experts say Canada's long-term care isn't ready for the next crisis. The pandemic seems like a distant memory now, but for those whose loved ones died in care homes, the memory is still haunting. Residents unable to have any visitors and not enough staff to care for those who were left isolated. Thousands of people died of COVID in long-term care in Canada, and since then the failures have been well documented. But as Mike Drolet explains, little action has been taken, and experts are again sounding the alarm.
The Royal Society of Canada report on restoring trust in the aftermath of COVID begins with a dire warning. It is unlikely that long-term care homes are ready for another major event. And that's certainly not what families with seniors in the long-term care system want to hear. Brian Banks' mother Elizabeth, now in her late 90s, has been in a Toronto home for a decade. He sees a system running on the bare minimum.
I don't feel optimistic about kind of the trajectory of things at all. As I said, I think my own experience has been, relatively good with my mother, but, I don't feel good about what I see overall in the whole system for sure.
Long-term care homes were disproportionately affected by COVID-19, with more outbreaks, infections, and deaths, while families were often left watching from a distance. Still, the report found that Canada did have some success in regards to infection control, protective equipment, and the availability of vaccines. But that, they concluded, stopped the hemorrhage. The affliction, meaning the long-term fix, has yet to be solved.
It is a crime that people are afraid to go to a nursing home, to a long-term care home.
To that end, 3 recommendations made in the report were identified as priority: addressing the needs of the workforce, tying funding to results, and developing an accountability structure to ensure it all works.
Thank you so much.
Some of those gaps could be bridged by the Safe Long-Term Care Act, but Health Minister Mark Holland, who said it would be introduced soon, didn't sound convinced today.
There's deep challenges. I think that, COVID exposed the weaknesses in our long-term care system and the underinvestment that occurred. This is largely an area of provincial jurisdiction, but we put up our hand and said we all have to work together.
The Safe Long-Term Care Act could be a game changer. It could, but we don't know if it will be.
And there's the rub. Addressing high staff turnover rates and quality of care sounds good on paper.
Okay, bedroom.
But it's far more complicated to fix for good. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Amazing or absurd? Next, the ambitious project to restore one of Egypt's pyramids. There's a reason Egypt's pyramids draw so many visitors. They're amazing, unlike anything else in the world. And they are, of course, thousands of years old. No one expects them to look perfect. But now one of them near Cairo is getting an extreme makeover. And as Redmond Shannon explains, the plan is being both mocked and applauded.
The 3 pyramids of Giza stand mostly as they were in 2500 BC. The main change, the smoother outer layers of stone stripped away over the centuries. But according to the head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure may soon more closely match its glory years of the 4th dynasty. In Giza, only Menkaure features these granite casing blocks. They used to reach halfway up the 65-metre structure. Mustafa Waziri says those that have fallen off are being gathered or excavated, catalogued, and will eventually be reset on the pyramid to look something like this. Waziri calls it the project of the century, but not everyone is so excited. One Cairo-based Egyptologist called the plan unbelievable and akin to tiling the pyramid. She asked other academics to stand against the project, like Professor Aidan Dodson.
It's the devil's in the detail. The concept of putting the stone which has fallen off back, fine. My concern would be is if they want to take it further than that and start putting new material in place.
Dodson says the type of bonding cement used is important, along with whether they will also want to restore the smooth limestone casing on the top half, something that would have to involve new stones. So why is this happening now? Well, we can only speculate.
There are people that are deciding not to go on holiday to the Middle East. So I think the idea is partly just to grab people's imaginations.
Waziri says his project will take 3 years. In pyramid terms, that is but the blink of an eye. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada, something a little younger, the Leaf at Assiniboine Park in Winnipeg. It has 4 distinct biomes. It houses all kinds of plants, just beautiful. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.